think. But the most remarkable feedback came from a guy who was a Buddhist. It was very funny. And he told me, well, I never looked into religion. He said, I'm a Buddhist. And when you look at the core concepts of Buddhism, of course, in a way, it's atheistic, because goal, so to say, of Buddhism is to go to nirvana. And that means you disappear in a way. And he said, well, I always found it like spiritual atheism. And of course, that's what he said. But he said it was the first time that I thought, well, perhaps there is something else. Perhaps there is a creator. And he was looking into, and he is one of the guys who took Shahada in the end. So it was very funny to hear from, in the Dutch context, it's very agnostic, very secular. Has, like say, a historical Christian background, and then there's a Buddhist guy in the Netherlands who becomes a Muslim.
Now let me ask some questions that are frequently asked by disbelievers. What would you say to a person who says that your prophet plagiarized from the Old Testament and the New Testament and came up with the Quran?
Yeah, no, it's that's really impossible. Of course, I looked into that argument as well, especially when I was like a Islam critic. But when you look at the Quran, and it is constructed, it's almost impossible for someone, especially when you don't have a computer, to make sure that there is like unity in it. And there is a lot of unity, whether people believe it or not. Even very skeptic people from the Western tradition, even the Eastern tradition in it, and I'm not talking about Muslim countries, they say it's a remarkable book. So for someone who didn't have a computer, who was illiterate in a way, it is impossible to create something like that. If he did, it is a miracle on its own. But when it comes to people who say he copied stuff like that, well, the New Testament, for example, wasn't there yet. There was no New Testament. It wasn't translated into Arabic. And if he really was illiterate, how could he know? And if there were perhaps 2-3 people telling him some stories about Christianity, there is so much deep theological stuff in the Quran related to Christianity that's impossible, because again, there was no New Testament yet, so he couldn't copy it at all. It was impossible. I always see, when I look at Christianity, I always see it as a book with a lot of truth, but not the complete truth. So when I look at, for example, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran, and I put it next to it, it's like a puzzle. So where I miss some things, and things are a little bit changed in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And when Islam came with the Quran, it corrected the first 2 revelations, so to say. So it completed my religion, and it's, of course, it's in the Quran itself. Well, today I completed your religion. But also when you look at it from a theological perspective, even from Christianity as an ex-Christian, of course, I think that counts. So that's true. And the part of Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, he's of course in Christianity a very core person. He is almost the central figure, but he is not absent in Islam, because some people ask me, why do you left the team of Jesus? That was really a question. And I told them, well, I didn't left the team of Jesus. Jesus is in our team as well. So, but it's for a lot of Christians very hard to accept that after Jesus there was someone else. And if people do accept that, then it's very easy for them to become Muslim.
They also wonder about Sharia. Generally, they only think of some really harsh punishments like the ones they see in the media. Is Sharia really the same thing that most people think of? If not, what is Sharia?
Well, of course, I'm not a scholar, but what I know, when I read and learned about Sharia, they say, well, it's a doctrine of religious duties. And it's very broad. It has to do with clothing, it has to do with food, it has to do with praying, it has to do with trade, it has to do with everything. And of course, there's this small part that has to do with criminal justice as well. But in the West, and it has to do with the propaganda from way back, like we talked about it in the 16th, 17th century. But up till this day, people are saying, well, Sharia is this, that. No, that's not Sharia. It's a very, very small part of Sharia. But it is because Islam is a holistic concept. So it doesn't talk only about the way of the heart. It's a practical religion. It really fits life here on earth in the dunya. So what it means is that we have to talk about all these aspects, all these segments of the dunya as well. And criminal justice is a part of it. And a lot of people in the West often say to me, well, they don't really punish people. We have people here who committed rape, for example. They only get 1 year in prison. 1 year. And I can imagine, if, as a father, if my daughter was raped, I don't want this guy to be punished 1 year. I want to severe punishment, a real punishment. And when I look at other systems, of course there are stronger punishments, but that's not what Sharia is about. And again, you have this concept of shubuhat, I think. So before someone really is punished in that way, there are so many factors, so many restrictions that it's almost impossible. So most of the time, it's only to make sure that people understand this is a very big offensive thing that you are about to do or that you did. But in the West, they don't see it like that because they don't want to see Islam for what it is most of the time, especially people who do know Islam in the core, but they really don't want to be a Muslim. So they take these arguments and they twist it a little bit and they make it scary and stuff like that. But when you look at the Ottoman Empire, for example, or apostasy, because that's something that a lot of people talk about, right? Yeah, when you're an apostate, you get killed, etc. When you compare that, for example, to America before it became the United States, there have been a lot of people who were killed there because they left their religion, because the church there or the state there said you're not a real Christian, or were doubting the Inquisition in Europe. They killed so many people, thousands and thousands of people. And when you compare that, for example, to the Ottoman Empire, in over the last 400 years of the Ottoman Empire, only 3 people were punished that way. 3. And when you compare that to the West, where thousands and thousands, but still the idea is Islam is scary and they kill everybody, and the West is sweet and nice. No, that's not the real deal. That's not factual. It's not historical. But that's propaganda. So, but that's another topic, I think.
They also ask, why do we need laws from God to be ruled justly? Can't we find what is right and what is wrong on our own? Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. We realize that 80% of our audience, including this video, are not subscribed to our channel. As you know, we are a non-profit organization and advertisements are disabled on our videos. Toward Eternity is not just a YouTube channel, but also a madrasa to educate ourselves and the youth Islamically. So the only reason we are asking for this is to spread the truth. It may seem like a small act, but inshallah, it will help us reach millions of people. Now let's click the like and the subscribe buttons and let's together walk toward
দেশের 1 নম্বর গ্লুকোজ ব্র্যান্ড গ্লুকোম্যাক্সি একই এনার্জিতে এলো নতুন প্যাকে
eternity. They also ask, why do we need laws from God to be ruled justly? Can't we find what is right and what is wrong on our own?
Yeah, it's almost a philosophical question. No, I don't think people can do that because people are very changeable. And when you look at the history, and of course I'm a Western guy and I live in the West, when I look at the history of the West, the times that people thought they could do without a deity, without God, Allah, it didn't end up very well. When you look at, for example, the DDR, Eastern Germany, or when you look at the Soviet Union, for example, Russia, they had communism. And in communism, the state religion was atheism. And there have been a lot of ulama who were killed there because of the fact that they were Muslim and they were preaching religion and the belief in one God. They were killed, slaughtered in a horrible way, but also Christian monks. There were a lot of people really killed. So if people say, well, religion always causes violence, well, look at the Soviet Union. They were explicitly not religious and they committed horrible crimes. Over 20 million of their own people were killed, let alone the other people. Even in Albania, that used to be a Muslim country, of course, when they were under the communists, Enver Hoxha, he killed a lot of people. In China, North Korea, there are so many contexts, and of course, sometimes things change, fortunately. But when you look at the idea of people ruling themselves without the guidance of God, it doesn't end up well. Well, even when you look at the Second World War, when you look at Nazi Germany, from 39 till 45, he ruled practically the continent of Europe. But there were so many people killed. There were even disabled people who were slaughtered in the most horrible ways. And they made their man-made rules. Well, it didn't those people. So I think that the only security for mankind to be guided in the correct way so that we can live in peace among each other is the guidance of Allah, of God.
Many non-Muslims in the West think that Islam restricts freedom because we know that they are known for and proud of a free life. This can bring happiness to humanity.
Well, I think Islam is freedom because nobody is completely free. You're always a slave of something, a slave of your money, or a slave of women, or a slave of good clothes, or a slave of whatever. Then at least be a slave of the truth.